I would like to thank Kitty Hardy and the committee for inviting me here to speak on the 90th anniversary of the death of one of Ireland's greatest soldiers, General Liam Lynch. Although Kitty describes me as a historian, this I am not, at least in the formal sense. I have not studied history in any of our universities, where all too commonly the history encouraged and promoted is that which satisfies the requirements of present-day politics. The history that I know was given to me at home, and in listening to the conversations of that generation that is now passing. It is the history of roadside crosses and memorials to fallen soldiers. It is the history that is spoken of at the fireside and read from well-known books that are handed from reader to reader. This is Ireland's true history, and it is through this history that I came to know of General Liam Lynch, the Chief of Staff of the Irish Republican Army. My grandmother was Madge Clifford. She was Liam Lynch's personal secretary for the last 5 months of his life. During the Tan War, she had worked with Austin Stack in the Department of Home Affairs in Dublin. When the Civil War started, she was one of the few women in the Four Courts garrison, and one of only a handful that managed to escape captivity following the fall of the Republican headquarters to British artillery and Free State forces. From July to November, she worked with Barry O'Malley as his secretary while he was Assistant Chief of Staff, but in a shootout in November on Aylesbury Road, he was captured. At that time, in November of 1922, Liam Lynch had set up his headquarters in the Tower House in Santry on the outskirts of Dublin, and from this large house, which stood in its own grounds, the home of a wealthy business family, the Republican war effort in the defence of the Republic of 1916 was coordinated. It was here that Liam Lynch, Moss Toomey, P.J. Rutledge, Madge Clifford, and others worked night and day as the tide of war continued to turn in favour of those for whom power was more important than principle. By April 1923, the military situation on the field of battle was grim. A policy of executions by the Free State government, which their imperial masters had shied away from, was implemented. Mass murders of unarmed prisoners took place, and there was the internment of thousands upon thousands, and this had all brought the once powerful Republican brigades to the brink of defeat, but still they fought on. Lynch decided that his place was to be with his men who still stood in the field of battle, against the overwhelming and unmerciful Free State government. And so he was to move his headquarters to the area along the Cork-Kerry border where resistance was still fierce. The events of the various meetings that occurred here in South Tipperary when Lynch met his executive are well covered elsewhere. Lynch had been a fit and agile man, but after 5 months confined in his Dublin headquarters, he had lost his speed and agility, and as he and his comrades scrambled away from Free State soldiers on the mountainside here, Lynch sadly lagged a little behind, but enough to be within the range of the bullet that was to kill him. And so died Liam Lynch, the soldier, but not his cause. And so we are here to remember this brave soldier of the Republic. However, remembrance is in fact a complex thing. So what are we really here to remember? A man, whether well-known or not well-known, is more than just a name, more than just a few dates inscribed on a tombstone. We are all, to a greater or lesser extent, what we believe in, and more so when we live in the service of those beliefs. The poet W.B. Yeats, in one of his poems, asked, how can we tell the dancer from the dance? Similarly, we cannot, nor should we, separate the man from his beliefs. And so it is with Liam Lynch. We are gathered here today to remember Liam Lynch, the man, the soldier, but also to remember the cause that he was dedicated to and ultimately gave his life for. Next month they will gather in Bailnaglaw to remember Michael Collins, the man, but not the cause that he fought for. They will separate Collins, the man, Collins, the rebel who fought in the GPO, the man who commanded a squad of ruthless killers, the man who ordered the killing of General Henry Wilson during the truce. Wilson was the scourge of beleaguered Northern nationalists, and Michael Collins also armed IRA units which were attacking the six-county government in May of 1922. However, they have managed to separate Michael Collins, the man, from Michael Collins' beliefs, at least those he held under the last 8 weeks of his life. And so, with Michael Collins' original principles removed, the great and good of the 26 counties can come and be seen before the media's cameras. And who now remembers Frank Aiken, Frank Aiken, who took Liam Lynch's position as Chief of Staff, but who could never take his place in history. Frank Aiken was a man that quickly shed his principles, if he had any to start with, and all this was in the pursuit and the maintenance of political power for its own sake. Aiken was the man who organised internment and executions of those in the 1940s who, like Liam Lynch, had declared for a republic and would serve under no other law. In 1983, Aiken was buried in Camlock, South Armagh, in a funeral that had to be guarded by British soldiers and was ignored by the local Republican population. This was in marked contrast to the funeral of hunger striker Raymond McCreesh, who died with his principles intact 2 years earlier, and whose funeral was attended by tens of thousands. And who gathers now in Glasnevin Cemetery to remember De Valera? Perhaps they would if he had stood by his allegiance to the Republic of 1916, rather than using the 26 county state as his own personal fiefdom, and using the methods of Lloyd George and Richard Mulcahy to crush those who still declared for a republic and still would live under no other law. And so this is the difficulty with Liam Lynch. It is not possible to separate the man from his beliefs. He knew what he stood for, he knew what he acted for, and he could not countenance any compromise in the pursuit of a republic for all of Ireland under the unfettered control of all of its people. And then, for those who would seek to lead us politically in this partition state, remembering a figure of Liam Lynch's stature is a problem. The acceptance of a British border fell far short of Liam Lynch's 32-county republic. For those who would accept what amounts to Home Rule for the North and Home Rule for the South in a 20th century version of the old Tudor policy of surrender and regrant, remembering Liam Lynch is indeed an embarrassment. He is the banquo at their feast. Politically, of course, they could not criticise his aim of a totally free Ireland, at least not in public. And so this towering figure of Irish history had to be denigrated. They would claim that he was somebody who was just a soldier, a fighter, a man who had no interest in peace. However, in March 1922, 3 months before the Civil War, as stronger Republican forces in Limerick under Ernie O'Malley were on the brink of civil war with the Free State, it was Lynch who intervened and arranged that fighting would not start in the city. Again in July 1922, shortly after the Civil War had started, when IRA forces entered and captured Limerick City, Lynch ordered a ceasefire to allow time for a negotiated settlement and to stop Irishmen killing Irishmen. However, this brief interlude was used by General Michael Brennan and his Free State forces to get reinforcements and the artillery needed to allow the Free State to once again capture the city. Another Treaty of Limerick was broken. It is now the accepted position that the Free State it is now the accepted position that the Civil War dragged on through the winter and the spring and into the summer of 1923 because Liam Lynch refused to halt the fighting. Even those leaders who were on the Republican side and who a few years later would accept the Free State position with regard to partition in exchange for political power in a 26-county state, they too would blame Liam Lynch as they washed their hands of the republic that they had originally pledged allegiance to. However, this must not be left unchallenged. The Free State government were not interested in negotiated peace. Attempts at political and military pacts in the weeks prior to the attack in the Four Courts failed because the Free State's British patrons demanded that there was never going to be a republic. A peace agreement that halted fighting in Limerick in 1922 was broken by Free State forces. When the Vatican intervened and sent legates to negotiate a peace in September 1922 after 2 months of bloody fighting, Mulcahy sent them packing as well. The total destruction of the Irish Republic that had been established in 1919 was what the British demanded, and that's what Mulcahy O'Higgins and their minions would deliver to their imperial paymasters. The British Field Master, General Montgomery, who himself would be famous in the Second World War, summed it up in a letter to General Percival, desperately against Tom Barry in West Cork. And to quote from Montgomery, in his letter he said, "Lloyd George was really right in what he did. We, meaning the British, could have quashed the rebellion, but it would only have broken out again. The only way, therefore, was to give them, the Irish, some form of self-government and let them squash the rebellion themselves. They were the only people that could stamp it out. And Mulcahy and O'Higgins and their ilk tried their best to do this as they waded through Irish blood. Prior to the Civil War, soldiers of the Republic were offered commissions and regular pay in the Free State Army that was being established in order to roll back the gains of the Black and Tan War. The vast majority of the fighting men refused these bribes and commissions, though at times they must have been tempting as things were hard economically. During the war that followed, during the Civil War, thousands upon thousands were imprisoned, but these men could easily have regained their freedom if they had signed a document forsaking the Republic, but they did not do so. In prison yards and in barracks throughout the land, men were placed in front of firing squads. If they too had forsaken their principles and signed, they too would have been spared. I would ask, how could Liam Lynch sign any document that would surrender what remained of his army? And how could he betray the defence of the Republic? How could he betray the sacrifices of his soldiers and his people? They were not his to betray. But surrender was not what Mulcahy and Higgins wanted. They wished for a total destruction of what remained of the Republic, and that was what was demanded of their British masters. So even when the remnant of the once great Republican army left the field of battle in May 1922 and the guns fell silent in the hills and streets of Ireland, Free State firing squads were still ordered to continue their grim work. Men starved and died in prison, though the Civil War had ended. Republicans were still hounded and killed out of hand, whether in the Knockmealdown Mountains or in the hills of Kerry. For over a year, thousands of Republicans were kept in prison and tens of thousands were forced to emigrate. This new Free State was going to be no place for men of principle. Even when there was no military threat, Mulcahy, O'Higgins and their minions continued to pulverise their opponents. The Civil War did not end quickly because Liam Lynch would not surrender, as historians would have you believe. It was prolonged because the Free State needed to completely destroy the Republic that was declared in 1916. However, principles should never be surrendered. Those who took Liam Lynch's place, most notably De Valera and Aiken, would have no such compunctions. They would remember the sacrifices of their Republican comrades as long as it was expedient to do so. But there would be a nation once again. With the drug of power now flowing in their veins, they set about bargaining away what was left of their Republican principles until we're left with the state that we live in today. And what is that state? At 26 counties ruled from abroad by foreign faceless men who dictate our every decision for the benefit of foreign bankers. There is continuing rule by the British Crown in the 6 counties of our land, supposedly now with parity of esteem, whatever that is. Political leaders, with the arrogance of a dictator, can declare openly that matters of conscience must take second place to the necessity of party politics, and that power must be maintained, whatever the cost to the born or the unborn. We now have huge unemployment. There is emigration of a whole generation and enslavement of those who they've left behind by high taxation and welfare handouts. There is the suppression of our culture and our history. They continue to do lip service to our native language, and England's Queen is openly welcomed on the streets of Terence MacSweeney's city. All this is the price of surrendering your nationhood and your principles. The Ireland of today is not a good place. It is a country that has almost lost its soul. It is government policy to remove religion and then history from the schools where a nation entrusts the education of its children, and these are to be replaced by whatever subjects the captains of industry require. All this is very sad. To use some lines written by the poet and patriot Bobby Sands, he starts his poem with the lines, "Tom Barry is dead, and Cork is asleep, and MacSweeney's cause has been sold." All this is very depressing. However, later on in that same poem, he goes on to say that a few still whisper Sean Tracy's name by heart and fires and dancing light. And this is obviously a reference to you who are gathered here today, the faithful few. Further on in the poem, he questions forlornly, who now cares for Kerry's graves? Well, Kerry's graves and monuments are well cared for. as are the memorials to our heroes throughout the 32 counties. This is done by the ceaseless work of the men and women of the National Graves Associations, by other local volunteers, and by the few who just refuse to forget. This is their act of defiance. As long as we keep our history alive, the ideals and sacrifices of men such as Liam Lynch, Dinny Lacey, Paddy Dalton, to name but few of the hundreds and thousands that died. Their ideals will not die, but do not depend on your schools or RTE or university professors to pass on the history of your nation to your children. It is up to you. You who are the few and still care. Collect and tell the stories to all that you can, because people will listen. There is an innate interest in Irish people for a knowledge of their past, and this they cannot quench. Tell them how it was local men and women from their own parishes and towns and villages that fought to free Ireland. It was not Michael Collins, it was not Eamon de Valera. Tipperary was freed by Tipperary men, Cork by Cork men, Dublin by Dublin men, Kerry by Kerry men, and so it is throughout the land. We must care for our monuments and graves, as each one of these monuments and graves asks a very public question out loud to those who just don't know. What happened here, and why did these men die? Official Ireland doesn't want the answer to be known, but it is the birthright of every Irish person to know their nation's true history. The next generation are more curious and less bound to established political thinking, and they will ask the questions. They will often find in proud revelation to them that their grandparents and great-grandparents were indeed party to the important events of the revolutionary period, but sadly nobody told them. Their parents and grandparents were denigrated as terrorists or gunmen, irregulars. They were the dissidents of their day, but in reality they were Ireland's true patriots. Though now the word is seldom heard, it has fallen into disuse, or at best misuse. It is you gathered here today who are the guardians of Ireland's past, and not any civil servant, not any university professor, not any president of a 26-county state, or any government minister. As long as you preserve and pass on this history, Liam Lynch, and more importantly, his cause will not be forgotten. It will serve as an inspiration and a goal to future generations. Mar Focal Scar, let me quote the words of the patriot of 1798, Jemmy Hope. He survived the rising, but his ideals could not be crushed, and later on in life, as he passed his ideals on to future generations, he would say, and to quote, "Hope for success, and in all circumstances have your heart. You may live to see Ireland what she ought to be, but whether or not, let us die in the faith." Gur maith agus an public